Walt Disney presents... Sancho, the homing steer.
Down on these plains, even the little dust devils grow up to be whoppers. They start spinning in the Big Bend country and twist themselves north right out of the skillet and up the panhandle till they're full-blown tornadoes. Yep, this is Texas. And when you clear the dust out of your eyes and let that bright blue sky come shining through, it looks mighty pretty and peaceful and friendly. Of course, that's just how it looks. Come right down to it, most everything that grows in this country is downright unfriendly. You can't hardly find anything that don't have a sticker sticking out of it somewhere. About the only critters that were ever tough enough to live here and like it were the longhorns. It was on a summer day in the year 1903 that a bunch of these cantankerous brutes had gathered at a bog hole and come face to face with a problem. Seems like a cow had got herself stuck in the mud and had departed this earth. So who would take care of her calf? Well, the buzzards figured they had the answer to that. You might say then that Ed Kerr happened along just in time. He was always on the lookout for calves that needed a home. When the buzzards were up, Ed knew that something had to be down. And if it was a cow, then he had a right to lay claim to her wild, unbranded calf. This was called mavericking, and it was an honest profession. Ed Kerr knew he was walking into trouble because longhorns reckon they can take care of their own better than any human. But Ed figured maybe the mud would slow them down. Well, that's how it all began. Ed didn't know he'd picked up a saddle full of trouble. Matter of fact, he counted this a real lucky morning. Now it is back to the ranch and all the chores that were waiting. As ranches go, Ed's place didn't look like it'd go very far. For one thing, it was short on grass and water. But Ed had plans for drilling a deep well. Then he'd start building a real cattle spread. Meantime, he was thankful for what he had, and he was thankful most of all for his wife, Maria.
Que cantaba el rey David a las muchachas bonitas, se las cantamos aquí. Tarim, bambarirarira. Lara, muy buenos días, ¿cómo amanecieron? Un momentito, I'll feed you. Y buenos días a usted, señorita. Your mama will feed you. Rachel, come on, señora Goat. Come on. Buenos días, ¿cómo amaneció usted? Come on, señora Goat.
Maria!
Egon.
Maria!
Thank you, Senora Goat.
Maria!
Rassler was supposed to be a watchdog and keep law and order around here. But right now, he couldn't resist saying howdy to the boss. Of course, that opened the way for a couple of barnyard bandits.
Look, Maria, what I got.
Where did you find him?
Oh, found him over in the bog.
Poor becerrito. His mama? Poor becerrito. Here, you take him for me. Vamos. Vamos, chiquito. Put him in. Oh, you are so dirty, my little Sancho. Sancho? Eduardo, he now has a name. I call him Sancho. It means pet, you know.
Pet? Got a yard full now.
Ah, but this will be the numero uno, Sancho. The number one.
So now the calf had a name and a home, and someone to do for him. About all he did for himself was to sprout a set of horns that made him think he was king of the hill. Like all longhorns, Sancho had picked out his own special homing place. Maria called it his querencia. It was just an old mesquite tree, only good for roosting, but the little longhorn had claimed it, and he believed in squatters' rights, too. Most of his neighbors were content to live in peace, but some yard birds just aren't peaceful by nature. El Ganso and his gang were bent on getting back to Querencia for the feathered folk. This range war was fought just about every other day, but it never got out of hand. Maria was always around to break it up.
Se van a lastimar uno al otro. You're going to hurt each other.
Sancho never did have the good sense to quit when he was ahead. And whenever he tackled El Ganso on his own ground, which was the water trough, he usually got the worst of it. Then he'd look for sympathy from Maria.
No, Sancho. All right, I warn you. They're hot, no? You like the peppers? Well, you will like my tamales and my enchiladas and my tortillas better. And they will make good meat. What I say, Sancho, I'm sorry, perdóname. Never, never, you're one of the family.
Sancho never doubted that he was one of the family. And he pretty much did have the run of the ranch, except for one precious half-acre plot, Maria's cornfield. The brush fence and the pretty little green shoots just beyond had tempted Sancho for a long time. But whenever he got his nose into the problem, Rassler would start earning his keep. It wouldn't be hard to hate a dog like that. Now, Maria was the best corn-growing gal south of the Panhandle. And while Ed was proud of her, he figured a Texas ranch was made for growing cattle, not corn. Then Maria'd argue back that their future was in the ground and not on the hoof. So her one ambition was to grow a prime crop, sell it, buy a mule, then grow bigger and better crops. Well, one thing, the corn was growing. Season after season, the warm summer wind would come up out of old Mexico and blow its sweet, tempting perfume at Sancho. Yep, Sancho too had grown up. A half a ton of corned beef, thanks to Maria's tortillas.
Señorita, if you want to be señora, ven chiquita, let me tell you what to do. Not your money, not your beauty, they don't matter. There is only one thing that will keep your sweetheart true. It's tortilla. It's the way you make tortillas. First, you must grind the corn just so. Tortillas. It's the way you make tortillas. Then you mix the batter, mucho, mucho. And after that, it's a very simple matter. Start to pat and be sure that you make it mucho flatter. Pat the batter, make it flatter, muy flatter, mucho flatter. Make it flatter, make it flatter, make it flatter, make it flatter, make it flatter. It's a very simple matter. It's the fact that you make tortillas flatter. Pat the batter, make them flatter, muy flatter, mucho flatter. Make them flatter, make them flatter, make them flatter. No, no, no. If I give you a segundo, it will make you too rotundo.
The tortillas had made Sancho thirsty, but getting a drink meant another perilous invasion of goose country. This time, the water trough seemed to be deserted. Then he saw he had been ambushed. So now it was a matter of timing his drinking for the least amount of pecking. From long experience, he'd got to be pretty good at it. Much too good to suit Ed Curry.
Yeah! Get out of there! Go, Sancho, get out of there! Go! Sancho, go!
Water was Ed's biggest headache. Sancho wasn't exactly the cure. He was drinking the ranch dry. Still, he was Maria's pet, and there wasn't much chance she'd ever sell him for beef. Yep, Sancho was getting to be a real problem. But Ed walked on eggs whenever he discussed him with Maria.
At least you gotta agree that he eats too much.
See?
And he drinks more water than a herd of buffalo. We got so darn little water that the ducks forgot how to swim.
It's true. Perhaps we should get rid of Sancho.
You mean it?
Mañana.
Mañana. I knew it. All right, honey. Come on, let's go set a spell.
Now, everybody knows that a longhorn is born for trouble. And it was on this same evening that Sancho set out to claim his birthright. He started out by looking for a good night snack, corn in some form or another. There was corn in there, all right, but he couldn't get at it through the window. Well, now this was better. An open invitation to move right in and put on the feed bag.
Honey, would you do just one thing for me?
Of course, Eduardo, anything.
Would you quit making a house pet out of that big dumb critter? Feeding him pepper, tortillas. You know that ain't right.
But Eduardo, it's because of their dumbness that I do these things. My heart goes out for the brutos that cannot tell us what they want. They have no voice.
No voice.
But I mean, no tongue.
Sancho was finding out that the corn crop wasn't easy to harvest. Sancho run plumb out of patience.
Get out of there! Get out of there! Get out! I'm gonna bust him wide open.
No, Eduardo, you have taught him his lesson. He will not do it again.
Of course he won't do it again. There ain't nothing left. Look at this.
But we will fix it. Please, Eduardo, come and help me and everything will be just the same.
There ain't nothing gonna be the same till we get rid of that big dumb ox.
He will hear you.
Maria, he ain't a human being.
What is it, Eduardo?
Bobcat or a coat, maybe. I'll go see about it. Hold up. Down there. Move your head, Sancho. Sancho.
Oh, the poor turkey.
The poor turkey.
You should be more careful, Eduardo. You might have shot Sancho.
A mistake I aimed the correct right now.
No, Eduardo. Don't you see? He has done you a favor.
What?
See? Now you can have the turkey dinner you've wanted.
It's a steak dinner I've been looking forward to.
Now, whenever trouble came to Sancho, it seemed like it always came in bunches, like a flock of buzzards. The very next day, for some bull-headed reason known only to himself, he suddenly decided this was the time to move into paradise. Since Maria wasn't speaking to him that morning, there was no one to stop him on his fateful journey. Sancho always figured it would taste good, but this was delicious.
Eduardo! Sancho's in the corn! You're gonna ruin my corn, Sancho! You're gonna ruin my corn! No, it's not for you!
I gotta get a rope on him. Oh, Sancho!
You cannot have the corn! There will be no mule money.
Looks like a herd of buffalo been playing squat tag. Maria, this ranch ain't big enough for us not steer too. That critter's gotta go.
Perhaps you're right, Agar. Perhaps you're right.
Now, to tell the truth, even if Maria was about ready to sell Sancho, nobody'd buy it. This country was already cattle poor. Then one day, like a fresh breeze out of the north, prosperity came to West Texas. A U.S. government order for 7,000 head of beef to be delivered in Montana. So the local ranchers picked out a holding ground, began bringing in their cattle, and in a couple days, the trail herd was starting to shape up. For the Longhorns, this would be their last big roundup. The future belonged to the Herefords, like this bunch owned by a man named Shiner. Mr. Shiner had been elected trail boss for the cattle drive. When all the steers were on bed ground, the final cleanup began. Now this was called brush popping, and it's rough and risky too. For a wild stray longhorn is the toughest, meanest critter of all. Before these spooky, onion-eyed strays could be put with the main herd, every one of them had to be head caught, heel caught, stretched out, and ear marked. Maria's heart was filled with trouble these days. Ed had signed on for the trail drive. The wages were good, and they could sure use the money. But he'd be gone for almost a year. Maria would have to run the ranch all by herself. And so there was one decision she just had to make. When Mr. Shiner dropped by, she knew she had to make it now.
Howdy, Ed.
Mr. Shiner?
Just passing by. Well, everything seems to be ready for tomorrow. Herd, trail hands, wagon. We'll be moving out bright and early. What's that?
Buenos dias, Senor Shiner.
Ma'am?
Please, will you buy him? He's very tame. What you call a lead steer, no?
A lead steer. Well, sure, Maria. I'll give you a beef price and $10 for him.
Gracias.
Now, honey.
Eduardo, my mind is made up. It is true. Sancho is not good for anything. He drinks the water, eats my tacos, spoils my corn. He will always make trouble. And the money will buy my mule.
Looks like you bought yourself a steer. I'll bring him in the morning.
No, not mañana. Please, Senor Shiner, take him with you. Take him now.
Help me put a rope on him.
Now, Sancho didn't know exactly what was going on, but he was mighty sure he didn't want any part of it.
Oh, Sancho! Ah, go on now! Go on, Sancho! Go on, Sancho! Go on, Sancho! Ho! Ho! Ho, Sancho! Ah, get on up there! Ho, Sancho! Ho! Come on, Sancho!
Sancho put up a stiff enough argument, but the men had all the answers. He was a gone steer. It was adios now to his home, his querencia, and Maria. Goodbyes were never easy for Ed and Maria. Next morning was the saddest parting of all. A year was a long, long time, and there weren't any words to make it any shorter. One thing, though, Maria did have her own special way of saying fare you well. It was the song that Ed liked best.
¿A dónde irá? Veloz y fatigada la golondrina que de aquí se va. Ay, si en el viento se encuentra extraviada, oh cielo santo, y sin poder
Well, they gave Sancho a bell, and they put him up at the head of the herd. Now, being a lead steer is supposed to be kind of an honor, but Sancho didn't want any favors. All he wanted was to be back on the Kerr Ranch, under his homing tree, cozy and comfortable. All through the morning, he walked, and he soon figured out you don't get any closer to home moving away from it. So along about noon, when Ed came up to check on him, he'd faded clean out of sight. Sancho had it all figured out how he'd make his getaway. He'd just lose himself in the herd. Then, when the right time came, he'd edge over to the flank. And when nobody was looking, he'd just kind of peel off. Well, that works slick as a wink. But it's a good rule when you make up your mind to do something, never look back. Sancho did, and that's where he made his mistake. The drag riders spotted him. It was their job to pick up strays, so they gathered him into the fold. When they put Sancho back in the #1 position at the head of the herd, funny thing happened. For some reason, he seemed to lose his hunger for home. Actually, that reason was Cookie's sourdough biscuit batter. It smelled just exactly like the makings of Maria's tortillas. The first day out on a trail drive is always a short one, so they made camp early.
Save a little for us.
Now, there's nothing fancy about Cookie's victuals. Just good rib-sticking grub and plenty of it. Of course, all the trail hands put together didn't have an appetite like Sancho's. He sampled all the good smells in the air and picked out the one he favored most. His nose told him the biscuit batter had been converted into the finished product. So he formed a chow line of one and homed in on the baked goods.
There once was a steer with a pair of long horns who ate cookies cooking, but not for too long.
Some critters will eat anything. Hey, give him some gravy too, Cookie. Poor Sancho.
At daybreak next morning, the trail drive really got underway. And now Sancho took charge like he'd been a lead steer all of his life. He rousted out all the late risers, then gave the signal to hit the trail. Mr. Shiner passed it on to the trail hands. Then he and Sancho moved out to set the pace for the herd. And that herd had a long, long way to go. You come right down to it, it would be the longest trail drive ever made in the West. Altogether, they'd travel north for 1,500 miles to where the Tongue and the Yellowstone rivers met in Montana at the Fort Keogh Indian Reservation. 10 days out and 100 miles from home, the herd bellowed across the border into New Mexico territory. Here they picked up the Goodnight-Loving cattle trail. They followed the Pecos River for a piece, then cut across the desert to make the 8,000-foot climb through Raton Pass. They veered west along the Sangre de Cristo Range and picked up the Cherokee Trail. 2.5 months out of Texas, they moved into Wyoming. They bypassed Cheyenne and Fort Laramie and followed the grass into Nebraska and South Dakota. Now, just 300 miles from Fort Keogh, the herd moved up into the Black Hills. Here in this cool, green high country, there'd be plenty of food and water for the critters. Now, on a trail drive, water can do crazy things to a herd of steers. They can be moving right along, come to a river, and refuse to cross it. They can be thirsty and refuse to drink. Now, this herd had been breathing its own dust for more than 1,200 miles. They was willing and ready to take on a full load. But drinking was one thing, and crossing was another. The herd just strung itself out in the shallows till it looked like a log jam waiting to be dynamited. No amount of yelling or prodding was going to budge these steers until their leader decided it was time to move on. Then, for some reason completely unknown to humans, Sancho suddenly decided now was the time. And sure enough, the whole herd come unlimbered and followed along behind. Ed Kerr was on the downstream side riding the flank position. He was on good solid bottom except for one place. And of course his horse found it, a man-sized pothole. Since Ed couldn't swim a lick, he was in a mite of trouble. Of course, Sancho was always glad to lend an old friend a helping tail.
Much obliged, Sancho.
Well, this was Sancho's red letter day. He not only got that cantankerous herd across the river, he'd saved Ed Kerr from a watery grave. Certainly a noble act above and beyond the call of duty. The camp in South Dakota that night was pretty much like all the others. The men were all tuckered out and kind of saddle sore by now, but they was never too tired to sing.
It's early in the spring when we round up the dogies, slap on their brands and bob off their tails. Round up the horses, load up the chuck wagon, then throw the dogies out on the trail. Whoopie-tie-I-O, get along, little dogies. It's your misfortune and none of my own. Whoopie-tie-I-O, get along, little dogies. You know that Wyoming will be your new home. You know that Wyoming will soon be your home. At night, in the bright stars up yonder, do the cowboys lay down in their rest? Do they gaze at this old world and wonder if rough riders rushed over its breast? Do they listen to the wolves in the canyon? Do they watch the night owls in their flight? Where the horse as his only companion, while guarding the herd through the night.
The next morning, everything started out the same as usual, but it wasn't going to end that way. Now, good range horses are always just a little jittery, especially in the cool of the morning. That's when they'll spook at the sound of a cactus dropping its needles. A rope corral was thrown up real gentle and easy to hold the wild bunch until every hand had picked his mount. Now, this could be a hair-raising time. It is wise to get it over with just as soon as possible.
Easy, boys.
When the rope circle was closed around the remuda, Ed Kerr moved in and throwed the catch rope for all the riders.
Give me a bunch, Give me barnyard. Look out, watch out for blue.
So far, saddling up was going slick and smooth. Cookie, as usual, had a couple of problems. Some people call them mules, but to Cookie, they were just a pair of ornery, slab-sided, long-eared knotheads. Sancho never liked being ignored. And he didn't know of any good reason why he shouldn't have a little snack before they all hit the trail. He didn't know either that any sudden noise would light the fuse on those horses like they was 50 kegs of dynamite.
What's going on over there, Cookie? Easy, boys. Easy, boys. Watch the paint. Watch the blue. Whoa, boys. Whoa. Whoa, whoa, paint. Whoa, blue. Easy there. Whoa. 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 Oh, no, get back.
It takes a lot to stampede mules, but Sancho managed that too.
The mule.
Sancho the cause of it all, just couldn't figure out what all the fuss was about. Well, the way he saw it, too much excitement was just downright unhealthy for man or beast. It was 2 days later before they got the trail herd back together again. The cost was 200 cows, 14 horses, and 7 busted-up trail hands. And they had no sooner got moving in the right direction once more when they were hit with another problem.
Looks like we got trouble.
See what they want.
Yes, sir.
It was an old Indian game called wahi. Actually, they wanted payment in steers for trailing a herd over Indian land. Only thing about it was this wasn't Indian land. These were just a couple of renegades practicing a little prairie blackmail.
Pretty big talk for such a small bunch. I say give them nothing.
Don't take many Indians to make a night raid and cause a stampede.
There's their meat.
Why Sancho, Dave?
Why not?
'Cause he ain't just a steer. He's different.
He sure is. He's a hurricane on 4 hooks. And he's liable to bust loose anytime.
There was no doubt about it, Mr. Shiner was the boss, and he did own Sancho. On the other hand, Ed felt kind of obliged to Sancho for that little matter over at the river crossing. Ed sure hated to do this, and he knew Maria would never forgive him. Then it came to him that in any situation, Sancho had a way of taking care of himself. Looked like Sancho was already proving him right. When the Indians went east, Sancho went west, and vice versa. Ed wasn't satisfied, though. He knew now he couldn't let any harm come to Sancho, so he followed along just in case. It took some doing, but the Indians finally got Sancho where they wanted him. Once they did, he decided he liked it. He didn't know that for him, this was trail's end. Ed was just about ready to move in when the camp dog took care of everything. Sancho just hated dogs. Sancho was free. Now Ed could go back and help push the herd on to Fort Keel. He was sure that any longhorn, not to mention Sancho, could more than take care of himself in the wilderness. But Sancho had no plans for going back to nature. He wanted to go back to Texas, to his querencia, his homing tree. Well, right now, home was just about 2,000 miles away. And for a longhorn steer on the hoof, I'd say that's a pretty fair piece of walking. Well, now let's just see what Sancho was up against. He was in South Dakota when he busted loose from the Indians. And while the trail herd pushed on north towards Fort Keel, Sancho was already veering south for Texas. He had 1,200 miles to go. A fair-sized piece of real estate for one longhorn steer to cover. First thing he had to do was kind of limber up his homing instinct. Shuffle through his memories till he figured out just what home looked like and where to find it. Then he got the feeling that home was down that way, just over the horizon. Why, sure, there it was, his querencia, that old mesquite tree back of the ranch house. So that was the way to go. If Sancho really kicked up his heels, he ought to make it back to Texas in just about 6 or 8 months. It was a couple days and about 10 miles further on that Sancho, heading south, came across a real breeze burner heading north. The coyote didn't stop to say howdy, and neither did the pack rat. Right now, they both had only one thing on their minds: supper. For the coyote, it was how to get it. And for the pack rat, it was how to get out of being got. Looked like the rat's hideout might hold out after all. Then Sancho, just out of plain idle curiosity, had to bull his way into the fracas. And he put his foot plumb in the middle of the coyote's problem. Must be losing his touch. Pesky pack rat got away again. One thing, though, he sure wasn't going to let that steer get away. If he kicked up one meal, more than likely he'd kick up many another. And so a partnership was formed that lasted some 2 weeks and 50-odd miles. It was kind of one-sided, though. All Sancho got was company, while the coyote grew fat on rats and rabbits. Then the day came when he repaid his debt in full. Sancho, always sociable, had just spotted what looked like some kind of a skinny cow. Kind of mixed up around the horns, but then Sancho wasn't particular. Might as well mosey over and chew the cud a while before he ambled on. Now, it so happened there was another party heading this way with strictly unsociable intentions. A lone homesteader living off the land can always use a little venison. Now, that hunter's gun wasn't the only thing that was cocked and ready to go, because there's nothing spookier than a cornered coyote. It just goes to show you how fickle old Dame Fortune can be. First, she changed the deer into a steer, and then just when the hunter could taste the beefsteak, darned if she didn't let a mangy coyote beat him to the trigger. So, 4 different characters took off in 4 different directions. Only Sancho, of course, made sure his was south. In the next month, Sancho cut across the corner of Nebraska and Wyoming and began drifting down the east wall of the Rockies. Then late in the shank of one afternoon, he come to what looked like a quiet, peaceful valley. But this was the hangout of the worst outlaws in the West, the last of the killer wolves, Lobos. One lone steer, even a longhorn, wouldn't have a chance against the wolf pack. Something in the air told Sancho the climate here was downright unhealthy. But he couldn't see anything. His legs kept saying run, but his head kept asking why. Yep, he had to admit that was 4 pretty good reasons. Well, now, somebody went and put a town out here. He called that real accommodating. To Sancho, in time of need, the steer's best friends were his humans. So our hero arrived in town high-hearted and hopeful. Trouble was, he arrived just 20 years too late. There wasn't even a smell of a human here, not even a ghost. So now the stage was set for the oldest scene in Western melodrama. One invincible hero, matching wits against a gang of black-hearted outlaws. Now, this might be a good place to hide. Nope, too many ghosts of his kinfolk in there. What kind of a town was this? A steer wasn't even safe in the calaboose. But they were heading due west. Now, maybe if he just sashayed out of here and headed east, he might be able to tippy-toe right out of town. But the wheel of fortune took the wrong turn for Sancho. It tipped off the wild bunch and put him on his trail again. Now, many a put-upon soul has tried to lose his troubles in a saloon, but it never works, because you always come out with more than you went in with. getting just a little tired of being the scaredy calf for a litter of loco lobos, if fight is what they really wanted, then he was fixing to knock the fire right out of them. Well, that dropped the curtain on the Opry. Those wolves would be a week of Sundays getting out of here. And by that time, Sancho would be long gone for home and Texas. Of course, it wasn't always going to be hair-raising adventure for Sancho. It was mostly just walking. Days and weeks and months of walking through a strange and ever-changing wilderness. Oftentimes, he'd drift many miles astray, but somehow he always kept moving south, trusting to homing instinct and fond memory to guide him to his promised land.
Now your heart is set on home and Sancho. Keep moving night and day. Let your memories guide you, Sancho. Sancho, move on home. And you will find the way. Never mind the hills and valleys. The wide and empty plain. Keep on moving southward, Longhorn. You'll find your home again. Get along, move along, Sancho, 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 Sancho.
Well, in 4 months, Sancho had walked himself out of Colorado and into the dead of winter in the San Juan Mountains of New Mexico. And the heavy snow cut him down to less than a mile a day. Yes, sir, he was sure in deep and down on his luck. What he could use was a few rabbit's feet, in more ways than one. His worst problem, though, was food. It was nothing for him to graze down a quarter acre in one meal. Now he couldn't even find one blade of grass. Poor old Sancho. Seemed like all of nature was conspiring against him lately. But getting bulldogged and bushwhacked by a fir tree, well, you might say that was the crowning touch. So now he had another problem, and he couldn't seem to shake it loose. In a way, though, that tantalizing twig led him into one of the strangest adventures of all. By now, Sancho was getting so fretful about being horn-hobbled, he didn't realize he'd been hearing some mighty sweet music. And when he discovered that there actually were people out here in the middle of nowhere, he was plumb paralyzed with happiness. On this afternoon, there was plenty of happiness in the air. Mountain youngsters in those days didn't have many playthings, just a couple of boards and a sledding hill. But they sure knew how to get the most fun out of them, especially when it was the day before Christmas.
On its horns.
No, it's a reindeer!
All right. We could pretend it's a reindeer. Pete, you go get a rope. I'll take off the branch.
They do say it's easier to saddle a cyclone and throw a towing hitch on a longhorn steer. But the kids didn't know that, and neither did Sancho. He took to these young'uns right off, and they took to him. So naturally, they all took off together.
Giddy up! Giddy up! Go on, go on, go on! Go!
Well, all but one.
Go faster, y'all! Now, go on, y'all! Count faster! Come on, y'all! Count, go! Go, y'all! Count tomorrow? Sure. I'll tie him up for us.
Merry Christmas, reindeer.
Merry Christmas, gang. Merry Christmas.
Maybe it was because it looked like his ranch house, and the woman looked a little bit like Maria. Anyway, all of a sudden, Sancho got the eagers to join the family circle.
Land sakes, what's that?
Oh, just an old steer.
For the love of Mike. It is a steer. Where'd you find him, son?
Out in the meadow.
Stray from some trail drive. Dress out, maybe? 800 pounds, Emmy.
Pa!
He's only good for beef. Sure ain't gonna give us any milk.
Go on, boy. You get ready for the services. I'll take care of the steer.
Now? On Christmas Eve?
I'm only gonna put him in the shed for the night. Now you get him moving.
Gee, Ma. I want to play with him. I don't want to eat him.
Now, of course, Sancho didn't know he was practically walking down the chute to the hereafter. The way he figured, things were getting better and better. This was just about the friendliest herd of humans he'd ever come across. And for the first time in his life, he was going to sleep with a roof over his head. So right about now, Sancho's homing instinct began taking a Christmas holiday. Lucky for him, the Yuletide spirit was burning bright in one small heart. It was long about an hour later, just before the meeting, that Frankie slipped out to form up a humane society of one.
I'll get a whopping for this. But I gotta do it anyway.
Sancho couldn't figure out what was going on here. Dragging a poor, unoffending steer out into the chill of the evening? Why, it just didn't make sense.
All right, get.
Huh? Get what?
Get, you dumb old steer. Go on.
All right, but this sure wasn't very neighborly.
What'll I tell him about all that beef? Fatten him up, and we'll have a New Year's feast for the whole town. Sancho never could take a hint unless a house fell on him. Matter of fact, that's just what was keeping him here now. A house filled with people and the soft, sweet music of Christmas. Well, no use standing around in the cold. He'd just sashay in, join the folks. He didn't know it'd be his last sashay, but a kindly providence did. Because now his eye was caught by the glint of a star, and one kind of tree became the symbol of another, his old mesquite tree down in Texas. Why, sure, what had he been thinking of? Time was wasting. He'd better be moving on.
Sancho was just 500 miles from Texas when he found green-up time in the Los Pinos Mountains of New Mexico. About the same time, he found a little cub bear with a mighty big temper. Just getting up from his long winter's nap, the cub started looking for his first meal right in the middle of the road to Texas. Now, Sancho didn't have anything against bears, but lately he'd been moving on a beeline, and he was all through making side trips. Well, that took care of the cub. And if Mama was looking for trouble, she could have some of the same. It was a couple of weeks later in a little lost valley in southern New Mexico that Sancho came across some of his distant kinfolk. At the turn of the century, this little herd of buffaloes was just about all that was left of the 75 million that once roamed the West. Family arguments were none of his business. Now, over there was a bunch that seemed to be more quiet and sociable. So he figured to mosey down and chew a blade of grass with them and then be on his way. Looked like everything was going to work out fine. Nobody seemed bothered about having a stranger in their midst, except for that one loud-mouthed calf. And that started everybody yelling for the vigilantes. Only Sancho thought they were the welcoming committee and trotted up to say howdy. And this was so upsetting, it whip-snaked the whole herd into a thundering stampede. You know, Sancho never could figure out what he said wrong. But he'd tarried long enough. It was time to hit the trail again. And there wasn't too much trail left. Less than 100 miles to the Texas border.
Sancho, move along, Sancho, just one more lonesome desert. Sancho, get along, Sancho, and there's the Rio Grande. Now you know you're back in Texas. So you come home, reached your promised land. The Longhorns promised land.
Yep, Sancho had made it to Texas. And there was only a little ways to go. He was looking at the Sierra Diablo Mountains, the last barrier across the road to home. All through the afternoon, Sancho climbed, and these shaly rocks were a pure misery. But there were worse things in these hills. Mountain lions. They didn't bother Sancho even a little. he was long past being scared of a couple of kitty cats. The lions had killed many a longhorn in their time, and this one didn't look any different than the others, so being brave just wasn't enough. This time, Sancho was cutting it too fine. One cat moved in, the male. But that big beller made him change his plans. He'd attacked from above. And then a pair of the biggest horns he'd ever seen changed his mind a whole lot more. Mrs. Cat was getting a little impatient. But Mr. Cat had made a decision. The healthiest view of a longhorn is when he's going away. That he-cat had some tall explaining to do, but you can't eat excuses. And the missus was fixing to part his hair. When the fur finally stopped flying, the she-cat set off to do the hunting for herself. She didn't find Sancho, but she did find something else. Horse meat is a lion's prime favorite. Now, this particular buckskin had covered more than 1,500 miles in the last 6 months, bringing a homesick cowboy all the way from Montana back to Texas. Yep, it was Ed Kerr, bedded down with the sun. With an early start, he'd be home come midday tomorrow. Of course, that cat would extend Ed's journey by considerable if she eliminated his horse. They say a mountain lion don't often tackle a man, but just once is too many. The cat sensed that his mate was dead, and the man had something to do with it. Well, what's a friend for if not in time of need? Of course, Sancho didn't set out to be a hero. He just hated cats. When Sancho saw he'd found an old friend, he was mighty pleased, but the feeling wasn't mutual. Wild longhorn longhorns are the worst kind of man killers. And that's what Ed thought he was faced with. There was only one thing to do.
Maria!
No, it wasn't any miracle. You just don't bust an inch-thick skull bone with a slant-ways bullet.
Eduardo! Eduardo, you're back.
Yeah.
Poor Eduardo. ¿Pero qué te ha pasado? Por el amor de Dios. Dime qué te ha pasado. Hurt. It is bad, no?
Not anymore.
And Sancho, I thought I would never see you again. Eduardo, Sancho is hurt too. What happened?
Have you got anything in the house to eat?
See, but...
Tacos, maybe?
See?
Did you hear that, Sancho? Tacos. Come on, partner. This story's gonna take a lot of telling.
And I have much to tell you. Lots has happened since you left. The house has been painted, and the corn was so good last year, we bought a mule. No, 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 Sancho.
I'll give him a taco.
So, at the end of the trail, everything turned out right fine for everybody. Ed drilled his deep well and started building the cattle spread he'd always wanted. Of course, all Maria wanted was to be Ed's good wife and helpmate. She kept raising bigger and better corn crops, mostly because she had a good helper. Not the mule. She sold him and gave the job to Sancho, because she figured everybody should pull their own weight around here. Sancho didn't mind, though, because every evening, under his mesquite tree, he found a time of peace and a bowl of tacos. And that's not asking much, I'd say, for a steer that walked across a continent and wrote his name in history beside the greatest heroes of the West.